I worked as an overnight grocery stocker. Manager for 19 years. This happened about 15 years ago, and I'll never forget it. It was a regular night shift, and we had no incoming deliveries, so it was just the crew and I backstocking occasionally. Someone from the meat department would stay late after hours and do a deep cleaning of their area about once a week. It was just after midnight when Mary, who worked in the meat department, came up to me. She was visibly shaken, in tears, and almost out of breath. She told me that there was a man standing in the meat department dressed in all black, motioning for her to come to him. She said she was scared and didn't know what to do. I told her to stay calm and grabbed another employee to check things out. We looked through the whole store, checking every aisle, the meat department, the back rooms. We checked everywhere, but there was no one. I reassured Mary that we had checked and there was nobody else in the store. It felt strange, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just tired, or maybe she had imagined it, but to be honest, I still felt uneasy. Our closing manager always did the final walkthrough to make sure that everyone was out, and it was just us workers. After that, Mary went back to finish her work. I tried to get back to mine, but only a few minutes later she came back up to me again, this time in full panic mode. She said that the man was back standing in the meat department apartment, motioning for her. Again, I told her to stay with me, and I grabbed the other employee once more. We looked around again. Nothing, no man or strange figure, just the empty store. At that point, I told Mary that she didn't have to finish her cleaning and she could go home for the night. I wasn't going to push her to work if she was that shaken up. She seemed relieved and left the next morning. When the store manager came in, I told her what had happened. She didn't seem too concerned. She just pulled up the camera footage from the night before to see if anything strange had been caught on tape, but there was nothing, no sign of anyone standing in the meat department, nobody in the store who shouldn't have been. There was all business as usual on the cameras. The manager seemed to brush it off and said that it was probably just stress or exhaustion getting to Mary. The manager did mention that Mary had told her a strange story a few nights before about a customer in the store who had a knife. She hadn't said much else about it, but the manager figured Mary had just been stressed out and needed some time off work. The next night I came to work, someone told me that Mary had passed away. She had gone home after work the night I sent her home, went to bed, and never woke up. A cause of death was never identified. Mary was only 40 years old and was a healthy person. I've worked plenty of overnights since, but that was the weirdest thing that ever happened on my ship. It still gets to me sometimes, even though it happened decades ago now. Over the winter a few years ago, I went to the grocery store on a weeknight with my two kids who were 14 and 15 years old and one of their friends as well. It was a routine shopping trip on a weeknight. At 7:00 p.m. as we were going through the store, I took notice of a young man. He was very well dressed in a designer coat, nice boots done up from head to toe. He looked like he was in his mid to late 20s or so. Good hair, just overall a good-looking person. He stood out to me because he just seemed too overdressed. As we proceeded through the store, I caught that the guy wasn't really with anyone and seemed to be in every aisle that I was in. He didn't have a cart and was on his phone a lot, and he kept picking up random items and pretending to look at the labels as if he was interested. He would pick up random items from a shelf, kind of pretend to seem like he was interested, and then put them back as my family and I would leave an aisle. You would follow us to the next aisle and do the same thing. This continued throughout the whole store. My family and I made our way to the checkout, bagged our groceries, and I gave a look around before we left to load the car. While loading the car, I saw the guy again. He looked at me and kind of made eye contact. Now, for context, my 15-year-old son is 6 feet 2 inches 200 pounds, and his buddy, who was with us, was almost as tall. I'm a thin woman 510, and my 14-year-old daughter is on the thinner side, I told the kids to get in the car, gave them my purse, and told them to lock the doors. They did as I said while I still had to return the shopping cart to the corral they're kept in. The guy was near the car parked in front of me now, so I stepped out in his path with the shopping cart, and I made it known that I saw him, making direct eye contact with him. I work in corrections, so I have a defensive stance, and I'm ready to go for whatever, and I wanted to let this man know that by my body language the guy was about 5 feet from me, and he picked up on the fact that I was aware of whatever was about to happen. He quickly turned around, did some kind of hand signal, and bolted. At this point, a big black SUV came down the next aisle of the parking lot with completely tinted windows. The man jumped in, and the car sped off, wheels screeching as they left. I don't know what they had planned, but it was clear that I was a target from the beginning, a rather bold move considering I was not alone. I did contact the police department for that city, and I made a report. They told me I was not the first person to contact them in recent weeks. With the same situation, they put extra patrols out in the shopping center for a few weeks. I don't get scared easily, but that incident still shakes me. It was around 1 a.m. one night when I decided to go to the grocery store. I had just gotten off of a late night shift of work and wanted to go shopping now, since I knew I wouldn't feel like it later in the day. After I woke up, the store I went to is open 24 hours, so I didn't think twice about heading out that lane. Everything was normal at first. I was doing my usual thing, picking up the items I needed and trying to get in and out quickly, but after about 30 minutes of shopping, I started to feel like somebody was watching me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but it wasn't long before I noticed a guy who seemed to keep showing up in the same aisle that I was in. At first it could have just been a coincidence, but after a while it started to feel less like a coincidence and more like he was following me. I told myself to calm down and kept shopping. I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could be nothing. When I finally made it to the checkout, I realized that I had left my wallet in the car. I was so annoyed with myself, I had to leave my basket at the counter and run back to my car to grab it since it was so late and the store wasn't busy. The cashier was nice enough to hold my stuff for me. When I got outside, I saw the same guy again. This time he was standing right next to my car, looking down like he was searching for something on the ground. My heart started racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I called my cousin as I walked towards my car, telling her about the weird guy who kept following me. She was talking to me on the phone while I was walking, just to keep me calm. When I got close to my car, the guy finally spoke to me. He asked if I needed help with something, but I just shook my head and said no. Then almost immediately he asked me for directions. I wasn't interested in talking to him at all, so I told him to ask someone else. Right when I was about to get in the car, I saw another guy come from the other side of the parking lot. He looked at me and asked again, "Are you sure you don't need any help?" Something was definitely off about all this. I don't know what came over me, but I just screamed as loud as I could. I yelled, "No, get away from me." I kept shouting, "Get away from me," over and over very loudly, and I think I took them by surprise. I don't think they were expecting that, and they sprinted off together in unison, confirming that they were together. Before I could react any further, the security guard from the store appeared. He must have heard me yelling and came running over. He chased after the two men who had took off running. He didn't catch them, and since there were two of them, I don't think there was much the security guard could have done, but he did come back holding a bag that they had dropped. The bag was filled with some small knives and some tape. They were clearly looking to either rob me or worse. I still can't believe how close I came to being in a bad situation if I hadn't been paying attention, or if I hadn't screamed for help. Things could have turned out very differently. It was a scary experience, but I'm so glad I trusted my instincts and didn't stay quiet that day. I learned that in a bad situation, just loudly yelling can disorient and can cause panic among people with bad intentions. I've worked at the same grocery store for years now, and I'm used to the early morning shifts. I'm the first person there most days, opening the store up and getting everything ready before the rest of the staff arrives. It's usually quiet with no customers, just me and the sound of the freezer doors opening and closing as I prepped the aisles. It was a little after 4:30 a.m. when I arrived one morning. The parking lot was empty as usual, and I let myself into the back through the employee door. The first thing I did was disarm the alarm and get the lights on. I made my way to the office to start up the computer system and check the stock list for the day. But as I walked past the office hallway, I noticed something off. The door to the back offices was open, and normally it was supposed to be closed by the closing manager the night before. I guess last night's manager must have forgotten. I went in to shut it, but when I pushed the door fully open, I froze there. Standing in the dark of one of the offices was a man. He wasn't dressed in any store uniform or anything that even remotely looked like it belonged there. He had a hoodie on, but the hood was down. He was standing in the corner COR of the office, going through stuff on a desk, looking for something. He didn't seem to notice me at first, but when he heard me, he turned around. His face was pale and his eyes were wide, like he was just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but it came out shaky. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a few slow steps back, his gaze darting around wildly, like he was calculating something. The man didn't say anything right away, so I talked again. I said as authoritative as I could, "You need to leave. This is private property." The man just stared at me now, so I turned to walk away to get my cell phone and call for help. I grabbed my phone from the table. I had left it on, but as soon as I grabbed it, I heard footsteps behind me. The guy was approaching me now, and I saw a knife in his hand under the dim fluorescent lights. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice getting more hostile now. "And neither are you." I turned and ran. Immediately, I ran past the aisles towards the front of the store, hoping he wouldn't catch me. I could hear him chasing me, the sound of his boots behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket as I ran and dialed 911, not stopping to speak to the dispatcher. At first, I just kept running, pushing myself faster, trying to put more distance between me and him. I finally managed to get my breath and told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the grocery store and was threatening me with a knife. I gave them the address and begged them to hurry. I didn't go near the front doors or the exit. If I tried to leave, I would have to unlock the doors, and I was worried that might take too long, and he'd catch me. I turned to the storage area, hiding behind some shelves, my back pressed to the cold metal. I could still hear him moving around the aisles, calling out to me in a low, almost sing-song voice. It was like he was playing some sick game and said, come out wherever you are," he said, laughing softly. I heard the sirens in the distance, but they didn't seem to bother this guy. He kept walking between the aisles looking for me. I could tell that he was very tired from running earlier, and I heard his labored breathing, so I knew that if he found where I was hiding, I could probably outrun him again. When the police officers entered the store, the man shifted his attention towards the front, where they were. The man didn't seem to understand what was happening at first, or maybe he didn't care. He turned towards the police and raised the knife in the air like he was ready to fight. The officers were able to disarm him safely without anyone getting hurt. We later found out that the man had recently been released from a Psych W and must have had a relapse of sorts. He actually used to work at our grocery store many years ago before I had started working at the store, so that was probably part of why he was at the store. He must have found a hiding spot before closing time the night before and stayed in the grocery store overnight. I feel bad for the guy because that morning in the grocery store wasn't normally how he acted probably, but regardless, it was a very scary start to my morning shift. I worked at the same grocery store for 5 years. Over the years, I noticed strange things happen in the store, leading me to believe that it's haunted. It all started one night about a month into my job. I was near the back of the store, the aisle with canned goods, when I heard a noise. It sounded like footsteps behind me. At first I figured it was another employee, but when I turned around, no one was there. Numerous times since then, and I've heard footsteps behind me when in reality nobody has been there. It always happens in the same aisle also. There was one night though that still sticks with me. It was just the store manager and I in the store that night. It was close to closing time, around 11:30, and I was in the dairy aisle. I heard a door creak open. I assumed it was the manager checking on things, but when I looked up, the manager wasn't there. I walked to the front of the store to find my manager and just take a break from stalking, since these strange occurrences with footsteps had been happening often and were freaking me out. When I went back to the dairy section, I heard the creak again. This time it was followed by the sound of a box sliding across the floor. I walked down the aisle and there was nothing there. The worst part came a few months ago. It was just me and another worker, Sarah, on the night shift. Along with our manager, we were in the back stocking some produce when we both heard a moaning sound. It honestly sounded like sort of inappropriate moaning, and it was freaky. It was loud enough to make us both stop what we were doing. We both knew that it was another strange occurrence and there wasn't going to be anybody nearby, but we checked anyway. To our surprise, we turned the corner and saw our manager. We asked if he was making those noises, but he claimed he had heard it and was coming to check out what was going on anyway. Throughout the next couple of months before I quit, there were other things that led me to believe it was haunted. Things such as carts rolling slowly into our aisle and other strange noises. I ended up quitting partly because I was just ready for a new job, but also partly because I was sick of all the strange occurrences that would happen in the grocery store regularly. A couple of months later, I found out from my friend Sarah, who still worked there, that the manager, who we worked with a lot, had been fired. He had been caught as the reason for all the strange occurrences in the store. For years he had been behind all the supposed hauntings, and none of it was real. Personally, I think that the manager guy was very creepy and doing this haunted grocery store trick not just once, but for years. Shows how weird of a guy he was.